By the end of February 2008, the Sri Lankan government announced that its economy is being affected by the global crisis as well.
You are very well aware with the recent developments in global and local financial markets, including the collapse of Sakwiti and Golden Key. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka intervention is quite necessary at the present levels. And we have devised a package.
Today we are in a situation where many people who bought vehicles like lorries and vans, who bought land, find themselves in a situation of not being able to make their monthly payments.
Many banks have been reluctant to lend to this sector. And as a result, the sector had been to some extent starved of money that was hitherto provided by the banks.
So the cabinet has put together a package to enable this situation to be changed. That is, finance companies which are carrying lands which are not productive will be able to sell those lands to the Lankaputra Development Bank, and they will receive 67% of the value of those lands. They will therefore achieve liquidity, and they will be able to recommence their commercial operations.
The Sri Lankan government has now announced a 4.2 billion rupee stimulus package for the licensed finance and leasing sub-sector, which is currently suffering a liquidity issue. However, in contrast to this, Sri Lanka's central bank said the island will not be affected by the global crisis.
In the entire world, there has been a major turmoil that has taken place in the financial markets. It has spread to financial institutions. It had been felt by various banks, and as a result, there has been a major turmoil in the world markets. We are all aware of that. At the same time, in Sri Lanka, there has been some unauthorized institutions which had collapsed, and the fallout of that collapse, of those collapses, had also had an impact on some of the registered financial companies and leasing companies.
Many numbers, many countries, many regions. Let me try and make some very broad and basic sense of all that. Even a few months ago, there was a lot of pop talk about decoupling. That developing countries could effectively decouple from the lead Western markets and thereby insulate themselves from this global economic crisis. These pundits have been proved dramatically wrong. Developing countries are, of course, very much linked with developed economies, and they are suffering a contraction through a collapse in demand for exports, through lack of credit, through a contraction in foreign direct investment, and probably a contraction in remittances as well. Now, those are the global trends. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to make a direct translation to the Sri Lankan situation in terms of a pretty bleak outlook for this year in the key export sectors, both in plantation crops and in garments, and in tourism and in remittances.
I think there's a great deal of truth to that, in the sense that I think what happened in the instance in the last 8 or so years, you had an environment where there was minimal regulation, lax oversight, and lack of transparency. That's the way I'll describe it in terms of what perpetuated the unfortunate situation we're being thrust into. And I'm talking about the derivatives market, for instance, which is completely unregulated, and that's that's by intention. Folks like Chairman Greenspan, folks like Bob Rubin, who was the former Treasury Secretary, they vociferously blocked any effort to introduce any kind of regulatory mechanism to oversee the derivative market, which in a way is which is why we are in this current position, given the fact that a lot of the mortgages we talked about were securitized.
Right.
So these mortgage-backed securities created all kinds of problems in an environment where there was, minimal regulation, lack of oversight, and completely lax oversight and lack of transparency.
A couple of years ago, when I was last here, I was talking about how Sri Lanka should follow China, and in passing, I told them that this giant crisis was headed beginning in the US. And, there was a discussion about my controversial views on the world economy. What I now get from a lot of people is that I didn't actually indicate to people the exact magnitude of the problem, because today the perception is this is the largest ever crisis faced in modern market systems, bigger than 1930s, and so big that the Federal Reserve is behaving in the most eccentric and erratic manner. I had a talk at the Hilton, and there I gave a couple of examples of the erratic behavior. It's estimated that the Fed has printed well in excess of $1 trillion in the last 6 months. But no one exactly knows how much it has printed, because there are all sorts of odd bits and pieces in that printing of 1 trillion. But it's gone beyond that. It's actually rescued a failed investment bank, which is actually not its mandate, because its only mandate is to really look after the commercial banking system. Now that it has actually rescued an investment bank, the question arises whether, if other banks fail, no matter what they are, whether the Federal Reserve will also step in to save them. Now, one thing there is, I don't know if you know this statistic, but there are things called credit default swaps.
Right.
They're worth $45 trillion. $45 trillion. That's 3 times the GDP of the United States. Now, a lot of those credit default swaps are also linked into the stock market. You understand?
Right.
So, if you see that magnitude of fall coming at you,
So
you're
domino.
not talking about financial markets anywhere in the world, let alone the United States, because this means that the whole system will melt down. The situation, in one way, by just printing large quantities of money, creates yet other bubbles. I don't know if you know this, but Alan Greenspan has been credited with taking us to the precipice, because he attempted to rescue the US by creating the housing bubble of today. And he did that successfully, but he created an almighty bubble. This is the bubble of all bubbles, as it were.
It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Razin Salih, Director of the European Centre for International Political Economy, and on the faculty at the London School of Economics. Welcome to the show, Razin.
Thank you, Harsha. Nice to be here.
Thanks. You have been writing a lot in a number of international journals, newspapers, about the global crisis. And you've been one of the rare critics of what everybody seems to believe is the magic bullet out of this crisis, that the markets have failed, and therefore governments need to now come rushing in to rescue these markets, spend excessive amounts of money in the trillions of dollars, and somehow create demand by deficit spending, and get these economies running again. We, even in Sri Lanka, sort of cut and paste job we have done. So stimulus packages for, wherever there are strong lobbies, government spending, whether it is possible or not. I want to ask you, why do you think these stimulus packages, government expenditure programs, are not the solution? And why are you being critical about these programs?
Maybe we can start with